Hey everyone, Alex Williams, founder and publisher of the New Stack, here for a discussion about building a scalable strategy for cloud security. I have some customers here, some people who are on the front lines who are actually implementing cloud native technologies and thinking about these questions of security. I'm going to go around the horn. Cobalt Labs, Alex Jones. Alex is infosec manager. Hey, Alex, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Pen test as a service. I look forward to hearing a little bit more about that. From Cognizant, Brian Cababe, Director of Cybersecurity Architecture and Governance. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
Excellent. And from Prologis, Tyler Warren, Director of IT Security. Hey, Tyler.
Hi, Alex. Good to be here.
Great to have you here. And so I have a series of questions I would love to pose to y'all, and I'm going to try to hit up each one of you as we go. So let's just get started. And the first question really is about that move to the cloud. We hear a lot about the move to the cloud, and I'm wondering what your organizations were thinking about when you were making that move. Was it security first, or was it more just lift and shift? Alex, what was the story at your company?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Really, when you're looking at moving to the cloud, I think something that's very important, and one of the first questions when you do threat modeling is what are we doing? And something that I've seen and commonly misconceived in the industry is the shared responsibility model in the cloud. So having a good understanding of whether you're using platform as a service, whether you're using containers, using infrastructure as a service, that will ultimately dictate what your security roadmap looks like. So I think the most important thing is, understanding that shared responsibility model, and then asking the question, what are we doing? And then that will inform your security decisions of what you have to do as far as implementing the security in the cloud.
Brian, is that a similar experience, or what were some of the differences that you found when you were moving? And when was that? Was that a year ago? Was it 5 years ago? Was it 10 years ago?
I think a lot of companies look to move to the cloud as a cost savings opportunity. A lot of them, what I've seen is, dealing with different teams, and it's kind of an ongoing effort. And I'd say it started, might be 7 years ago now, so in various degrees, but it's accelerated a lot more lately. But I think the one thing is that a lot of efforts begin moving to the cloud as a lift and shift. And when you kind of leverage IaaS and just kind of replicating what you're doing on-prem, you don't really see the cost savings that you thought you would immediately. But sometimes that's just the migration path. Maybe, not everyone is able to leverage all of the services available in the cloud immediately. So just getting there is a step forward. And then once you're there, you can look at what kind of past services you can use. You really have to look at what you're moving to the cloud, whether it's the whole organization, a specific product or environment, and just see how compatible it is, both from a technology perspective, but also from a process perspective. Like what kind of things are going to change. Even your DR strategy could change. You could be moving away from traditional methods of replicating data to more warm streams and so forth. But really, just getting there is a good step in the right direction. Some teams I have seen rewrite parts of their code to leverage like a database as a PaaS offering instead of just building out databases in a traditional IaaS perspective. So it just depends on how much time you have, the maturity, how many people you have to accomplish the task. But really, when you start to leverage a lot of the services in the cloud is when you really start to take advantage of the cost savings opportunities. And there's a lot you can do in the security space with that. There's used to be that you had less visibility in the cloud. But now I feel like there's a lot of tools available to you to provide you with more visibility, to the extent that when I'm working on efforts that are on-prem, sometimes I'm frustrated with what I feel like I'm limited as to what I can do in that environment.
So Tyler, I'm curious from your perspective about the move to the cloud, and I think of the move to the cloud a little bit like the difference between work and virtual work. It's the same, but it's different. Did you notice that when you were making your move to the cloud?
Yeah, Prologis actually started move to the cloud before I was there, and I've been here 6 years at this point. So it was kind of unheard of for people to make that decision way back then. So it's been quite the ride, designing security solutions around that quick move to the cloud. So, something Brian mentioned was lift and shift or design. In a perfect world, you want to design for the cloud, and that can be difficult and time consuming, requires certain expertise. But I have seen companies get into a lot of issues when they just do a lift and shift into the cloud for whatever reason. If you are going that route, make sure your house is in order, because you're going to replicate any issues you have on-prem in the cloud, and you're going to make it more difficult and more complex once you're in the cloud.
So that's a good segue to the next question I wanted to ask about the introduction of cloud native architectures, for they were not really even a concept at the time when Prologis, you were building out your own cloud service. Brian, same is true with Cognizant, and Alex, how many years ago did you say that you were starting, you guys moved to the cloud?
So Cobalt is a cloud first, so they've always been in the cloud from day one.
Okay, so that you have a long history there. So Brian, I'm curious on, you had 6 years of experience under your belt, so to speak, and cloud native architectures started to get more notice. Why did you decide to adopt cloud native architectures, and what made them different for you as compared to the way you'd historically been managing your teams and managing your workloads and all the the different kind of ways you did business?
Yeah, I'd say, one area is if you look at containers with Kubernetes, in some ways, people could view them as the architectures as being a little restrictive. So teams may not be used to doing things certain ways. They have to adapt to kind of, implement or be able to leverage that architecture or that service. But in a way, it provides structure. So it's good to leverage those if you can. And again, there's always going to be, you can't do things the way you've always done them. You have to change a little bit so you can leverage that service. And in a lot of ways, it's good. Like Tyler said, if you do a lift and shift, you're going to move your bad mistakes and sometimes even amplify them. So sometimes those services force you to do things the right way, or really take a hard look at how you're doing things and maybe how you should change how you're doing them currently.
Wow, that must have been a security test for you, Alex, amplifying your mistakes. I don't know if that's something that you experience or not, but for a pen test company that's trying to mitigate mistakes, that must have put another kind of pressure on you to get it right.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's a part of our services as well. As we do cloud penetration testing, cloud configuration reviews, but we've been able to leverage GCP, and we do have a small AWS environment where we have some resources in AWS. But initially, the company was founded really with a cloud first architecture. And it's a double-edged sword, when you're looking at cloud, because ultimately you have essentially what before cloud was so widely available. It's essentially an entire IT department. You have your networking team, you have your identity access management team, your servers, your hosting teams, all within one cloud console. So you can click a few buttons and basically do the work that used to take an entire IT and security department. So it can be a double-edged sword, and that goes back to what Brian mentioned. Some of the cost savings in the cloud, it's an advantage, but you really have to think about that wide breadth of that being an entire data center, all within a cloud console, and being able to spin up all these resources. Where in the legacy environments, it was a whole IT team and a whole data center team that did this management.
So Tyler, when you're thinking about cloud native technologies and how it affects your security posture, how would you describe that for Prologis? How did you approach that issue when you had to think about security, but also these issues with cloud native technologies that have different types of attack surfaces and can be much larger attack surfaces?
Yeah, sure. I think a problem that we ran into, and this may affect a lot of companies in the cloud or moving to the cloud, is, remember when VMs came out, people would suffer from VM sprawl. And now I think we see cloud sprawl because it's easy for anybody with a credit card to go sign up for any service. So, you've got all your SaaS is out there, then you've got your big IaaS and PaaS providers. And security teams can run into problems where you have too many tools, right? Too many blinky lights, and that's on-prem, and you can have that problem in the cloud. So I think looking at your security stack to give you better coverage through many different cloud providers, no matter who it is. You don't want a tool for, SaaS A, SaaS B, SaaS C, and then a different one for all your different IaaS, depending whose clouds those are in. You want to try to minimize the amount of tools, the amount of screens and alerts that you have. And a lot of the security providers, vendors out there have those tools available. So they do touch many different clouds.
Sure. Anyone want to add to that?
I think just to say, Tyler touched on something that you have to bear in mind a little bit more than in the past is the cost, because that sprawl can really add up. So both at the account level, so as an organization, if you don't have a firm grasp on the accounts or subscriptions that you're provisioning, that can spiral, and then maybe even have orphaned ones. But also within those accounts and subscriptions, what I've seen too is if an application isn't kind of built to scale properly, you could wind up scaling horizontally and having an exorbitant amount of, say, application servers or whatnot, instead of addressing the problem inherent in the application to improve performance. So it's important to monitor for those things too. And that's kind of a new aspect as part of being in the cloud.
So Alex, when you were adopting cloud native technologies and looking at what they provided and the capabilities they could have for your company, then started to balance that with the cloud service providers and what they offered in terms of security. What did you find?
Yeah, I think that, the major cloud providers, in particular, AWS, GCP, Azure, they've really expanded their native cloud security solutions with AWS Guard Duty. GCP has Google Security Center. They've really tried to build in and add in that native security functionality. And really, I think probably the most mature with the major cloud providers is the identity access management features. I mean, if you look at the way that you can do IAM and Azure and GCP and AWS, it's a little daunting, for security professionals, because you have to look at the policies, the resources, the users, and there's this highly complex matrixing. So the cloud providers have really strive to improve the native security features. And then, if you look at AWS Guard Duty and like Google Security Center, they've tried to make it easier for security teams to get those security analytics, right within their dashboard, natively within the cloud. The challenge in particular is, companies that have multi-cloud. A lot of companies are running resources in Amazon and Azure. In my case, we're running in GCP and AWS. So when you have multi-cloud, then it's like, okay, do we want to use like an Amazon dashboard, or do we want to use, GCP, and how can you enrich that data for, multi-cloud environments? And that's where the differentiator is with some of the third-party tools compared to what's native.
So you must have found, at least in the short term, that you could get by with the cloud service tools, but at some point you needed to make a decision about what else you needed. Tyler, would you say that's an accurate reflection of the circumstances that you saw?
Yeah, totally agree. It's good that like AWS, Azure, GCP have these native tools built in. So if you're just getting started, at least there's some security instead of just leaving you out there in the wind. Looking at setting some of these up, there is some expertise needed, and maybe some constant babysitting. And then if you are running loads and multiple services, like you mentioned, that's just exponentially more work that can tend to be manual. And that's why we really focused on finding tools that work, either alongside or replacements of those native tools that can do some automation, maybe a little more user-friendly, maybe some ML in the background so they can detect maybe a little better what not normal behavior is.
Not normal behavior. Yeah, that's an issue because that's what you're looking for, right, Brian? It's those anomalies. And you might be able to get just so far with the basic tools that the service providers offer because they're not meant to be specialty providers, are they?
Yeah, I mean, the native tools are good. They're definitely worth looking at. I mean, you have to bear in mind that there's the standard offering and then you could pay for a step up usually. And you have to evaluate, is that competitive with, say, a third-party option? But, even to Tyler's point, in some instances, you want a single pane of glass, and very often you're gonna wind up being multi-cloud. So the way to achieve that is to use a third-party tool, and that's part of evaluating the tool in that space that you want to use and building the requirements that are going to meet your need and evaluating the tools across that. But the native tool should always be a contender in that space and should always be looked at for certain.
Alex, so when you started thinking about moving beyond just the cloud service tools and what they offered, what were you looking for in a consolidated cloud native platform?
I think the big thing is, dynamic scanning, speed. Speed for the business is so important, and being able to dynamically, inventory your assets in the cloud. Set it up so you can have API scanning and get those assets dynamically. Being able to keep up with the cloud is ephemeral, so there's resources that will auto scale up and down, IPs that will change pretty rapidly, maybe on a daily, weekly basis. So I think probably the most important thing I would say is speed. Keeping up with the business, keeping up with the rapid agile pace that a lot of DevOps teams that are building in the cloud. So I think that speed is just really important to keep up with the ephemeral cloud. Yeah,
Tyler, we often hear speed in the same breath as velocity, which I would say is is a synonym for velocity and speed, are the similar kind of concepts. And that leads to resilience and reliability. Were those considerations when you were thinking about a consolidated cloud native platform, is thinking about that resilience and that reliability?
Yeah, because you definitely can make things more resilient in the cloud. I think if you design it right, it's not like I have to own 2 data centers. We've got cloud providers for things like that. As long as the third parties that we all deal with for all sorts of services have that mentality, then they're hopefully designing the same way. So we don't expect any of our providers to go down, especially in the security space. And speed is another interesting aspect because, you can get attacked maybe more quickly than you had your moat around your data center, but you can also spin up things quickly. So, visibility into some of the clouds is all API based, and that's very easy to spin up. As well as integrations is what I really look for. Bringing on new security providers is, do you talk to other provider A, B, and C, or are you trying to be your own lake and just hanging out by yourself? I don't think that flies. So the ability to communicate between different providers quickly, I think, is very important as well.
Brian, so how does your moat look these days? Have you been able to? Do you still need that moat around the castle, or is that consolidated cloud platform helping you not really need that moat anymore?
Yeah, it's more like you have to look at it from a model of defense in depth and not depending on that perimeter and having security controls at each layer and just having that visibility into your environment and just going back to being aware of the constructs, of the capabilities of the environment that you're in and how to leverage them to make sure you have the proper visibility. And response is a really key aspect of this, and it's often overlooked, but you have to bear that in mind too, is how you respond to and how will you contain something if you do see it. So having those plans ahead of time is essential, and how do you leverage the tools available in the cloud to do that is key.
So Alex, I want to ask you about shift left. It's a concept that gets a lot of attention these days, but I'm curious on how it's helped you think about the posture of the overall organization and how you just make your life easier and how it helps increase resilience and how it helps increase reliability. How would you characterize shift left in your organization?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. Shift left is ultimately it means that security, DevOps, engineering are all marching towards the same goals. So we want to find issues early on in the development pipeline. As soon as like a developer commits and does a build, we can find those issues. And ideally, we want to build in our security processes into the product and engineering processes so we can reduce friction and have high velocity for releases, and ultimately, all march towards a goal of releasing a quality product with an acceptable level of security. So we're trying to build in automation as much as we can with our tooling to shift left.
Excellent. And Tyler, when you're thinking about shift left, do you also think about infrastructure as code? Because there is a definite corollary there.
Yeah, when we started doing some customer-facing development a couple of years ago, we immediately moved into the just infrastructure as code. So giving development more power to build their environments, to push that out, and inserting security into their process. So I'm not interfering with their day-to-day work. So we're doing the static scans and dynamic scans as they're going through their process, and just treat it like another bug. So I knew when I was building the AppSec program that I couldn't interfere with them getting their code to production. So it's worked out very well. And I can't imagine doing this on-prem. It's so much easier with the cloud to give them secure access to be able to build these environments.
Brian, your experiences with shift left, are they new? Are they well practiced now? Are they accepted internally? What were some of the challenges you faced with the shift left concept?
I think some of the challenges are you really have to map out your process, right? So put your design together, look at what tools you're going to use, and then document how that's all going to work, and then involve the dev and operation teams in that so they can make adjustments to that to make it work for them. And then socialize that, communicate that with them, because they're going to play more of an active role in a lot of areas. And you were trying to enable them by shifting left and putting these things, under their control so they have direct access or capabilities. So it's a matter of how they're going to be able to operate and what they should do, and maybe even training them up on different tools. And some things change for them too. Some things get more automated and you're depending on scripts, CFTs, and things of that nature, instead of doing things manually. So it's important to make sure that all those components work, that they're involved in the development of those components, and that all areas of their teams are trained so they're aware of what's going on in the background, what they should do when certain events occur, or builds fail, things of that nature. And when something out of process happens, what they can do to adapt and who they work with to resolve those issues.
Excellent. We have a few minutes left. And so I'm going to bring this last question to all of you and would love to get your feedback. So when you think about the journey to the cloud, it changes. It's clearly different from organization. There's things that are very surprising. There are things that lead to better innovation. There are ways that they affect your security perspective. Organizations that are starting today are in a much different position than you started when you began your cloud journey several years ago. What advice would you give them today? Would you say, start with security first and think about that? Would you say, do the planning right now and don't bother with lift and shift? I'm just curious from your learnings, what you would think what would you say to those people who are thinking about the innovation that they're looking for the better security they're looking for? Tyler, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, definitely. If you can, design for the cloud first. Don't do the lift and shift. Design it using the right cloud native tools, and include security at every step. Because people are saying security is an enabler to business. I believe that's true. And it's much easier to make things secure as you go through a process like that than a year after you're in production and go, oops, we found this, and being completely reactive. The other thing I'd say is make sure your security foundations are there. Don't put a bunch of stuff in the cloud and not have MFA, for example. You get a lot of trouble there. Security foundations before you move to the cloud, I think, is the very fundamental thing that you have to do before you go to the next like blinky light or shiny object.
Okay. Brian, and then we'll finish out with Alex.
Yeah, I think that's key. Is not only does security have to be involved in every step, but involve security early. So we're part of that design, so it avoids rework. And then, so that solution, we make sure it scales not only from a functional perspective, but also from a security perspective. It just, it's a sound practice. It's more efficient. It's going to save time in the long run. And then definitely look at what you're moving to the cloud and how you can use PaaS more or as much as possible, because it's going to benefit from a resourcing perspective, cost perspective, and a lot of times even from a security perspective, just inherently, before you even have to add a lot of controls. The other thing is, though, bearing that in mind, is we have to be aware that given PaaS, how you enforce certain controls and some of the tools you use in the tech stack, you have to probably identify new ones to achieve the same goals.
Let's finish it out with Alex. Perhaps you can look at it from a pure security posture for us.
Yeah, I agree with what Brian and Tyler said. I think that, starting with the design phase, and even in the early design phase, you can even do just a high level threat model. What are we doing and what can go wrong? And then from there, start to build the foundations. There's so many cloud services that, MFA is a point that was mentioned. Building those foundations, making sure that you have auditing and logging turned on, making sure that you have well-designed policies for your identity access management. Getting more into the offensive side. A lot of the major breaches that have happened, like the S3 buckets, some of the big breaches have happened because of an IAM misconfiguration and how that related to a WAF or an S3 bucket policy. So, start with the basics, build the foundation, and then from there, reiteratively do a threat model and say, okay, what are we doing? What can go wrong? Build that into your design process and lay that foundation, and then build into more advanced security tooling once you have a solid foundation in place.
Well, excellent. I want to thank you all for taking the time today to join us, and to all the viewers and listeners out there. I hope you received some benefit from this discussion. I certainly did. We've been discussing how to build a scalable strategy for cloud security, and been joined by Alex Jones, infosec manager at Cobalt Labs. Thanks again, Alex, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Brian Cababe with Cognizant. He's Director of Cybersecurity Architecture and Governance. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. It was great to be here.
And Tyler Warren of Prologis, Director of IT Security. Tyler, thanks so much for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you. It was a good discussion.